Hey everybody, how's it going? This is another Deathwing tactics video, and this one is on Terminator Librarian HQ choice for Deathwing. We're looking at a Terminator Librarian model on the Games Workshop's website, and conveniently enough is painted up as a Dark Angel Terminator Librarian. So, first things first. In Deathwing, you must take Belial to make a Deathwing army. He makes them into troop choices. So any other HQ you're thinking about is really a secondary HQ. Now, because of that, sometimes it may not be worth putting the points into them because of the fact that they're really a secondary HQ, and while taking them can really help bolster your forces, it's going to make your army that much smaller. Keep it in mind that they may not cost as much as a Deathwing squad. They don't. But that could keep you from fielding another Deathwing squad, and instead the points you would have left over because you can't quite field another Deathwing squad, you can't field something else in its place, you can't field another Dreadnought. Either you maxed out on Dreadnoughts, you don't have the full points to utilize the Dreadnought. That means you're going to have to put upgrades in squads that maybe you wouldn't have done normally. Or play, a couple of points down because you just have 15 points you can't put anywhere for some reason. So it's not just like, oh, I don't get another squad. It's I don't get another squad, and I'm not really utilizing all the points I have because of the oddball point cost that it turned out to be. So you have to keep that in mind. Remember, Deathwing is small. Taking two HQs is going to make it smaller. I'm not saying they're useless as a secondary HQ, the Librarian or the Interrogator Chaplain. I'm just saying you really have to think about that in terms of how you're going to play your army and the tactics you're going to employ. Now, that being said, Dark Angels have, in my opinion, probably some of the worst Librarians because there's no range of psychic powers. There's only 2 in the book that every Librarian gets. They don't get to choose from a list. They only get 2. Ezekiel gets a 3rd psychic power. They can only utilize 1 psychic power a turn. The Leadership 9. Instead of being leadership 10. They have 2 wounds, but that's standard as far as librarians go, so that's not bad. Their stat line, aside from their leadership and their wounds, is basically the same as a captain from the previous edition codex of Space Marine, before their weapon skill 6 and their weapon skill 5. That's the stat line that the librarian has, except he has 2 wounds and leadership 9. So when you combine the leadership 9, the only 2 psychic powers you have, and that's it, and the only being able to do 1 a turn and never be able to do more than 1 a turn, to me it just feels like the Librarian is kind of an afterthought, like oh wait a minute, there's this unit called the Librarian that are in the Space Marines force, let's put that in the Dark Angels Codex. That's what it feels like to me personally. Can you still utilize it? Yes, and you can utilize it to a decent effect. I've seen it done, and I heard people talk about utilizing them to a decent effect. But I feel, especially if you're coming from the Space Marine Codex, the generic Space Marine Codex, or if you have dusting off your Deathwing models and get back into it, because let's say the last time you played was the previous edition in Dark Angels Codex, the Librarians have changed. They're not going to be able to be utilized like they used to utilize them. Think of them more as a Space Marine captain with some psychic ability in terms of a Librarian, because when you look at a captain and look at a Librarian, I'd say almost all the time they have a different playstyle lended to them. Even if you have both on the table, you're going to utilize the captain differently than you can utilize the Librarian. And the Deathwing Librarian, I feel you're going to get more use out of him, and he's going to be more effective for you if you utilize him as a captain that happens to have a psychic hood, a force weapon, and some psychic ability. Now, the 2 powers you get is Force Barrier and Hellfire. Hellfire is a template weapon, strength of 2d6 minus 2, and AP of d6. That's all 1. A little random, but overall nice. You can roll average. The Force Barrier psychic power is kind of like an invulnerability save. Instead of rolling a save for a wound you take, you make a psychic check. If you pass your psychic check, you save the wound as if you made a successful save. Things that ignore invulnerability saves, ignore Force Barrier. Now keep in mind, you only can do that once a turn, as you can only make 1 psychic test a turn. Or utilize 1 power a turn, as it says. So, while nice, You can't do it for a lot of wounds, but you really won't have to. So how can you utilize the Librarians? Well, like I said with Belial, you can put wounds on them. They're multiple wounded. Keep in mind the Librarian's only 2 wounds, so you have to be a little bit more careful with this. But you can still put a wound on them. And that keeps your squad from potentially dying. If you fail that wound, the Librarian will have 1 wound left, instead of losing a Terminator in your squad. And remember, every loss is felt more keenly in a Deathwing army than it is even in a generic Space Marine army. So you're going to want to be careful with that. Both in, putting wounds on the squad that the Librarian's a part of, and of course putting a wound on the Librarian. Now, he doesn't have much in terms of war gear options. Once you put him in Terminator armor, he can take a counter weapon, and that's it. So, 5-up invuln save, unlike Belial, who can take a storm shield. However, Force Barrier can come into its own here. Yes, it's only Leadership 9, but you're invariably going to take a last cannon to the face when you play Deathwing. Meaning, they're going to invariably put the anti-tank firepower into your Terminator squads. So if the Librarian's in there, you can be risky at this point because it is instant death. But Strength 8 weapons or Strength 9 weapons that ignore the armor value of 2+, so if they have an AP of 2 or less, 2 or 1 I should say, and a Strength of 8 or higher, that's going to be instant death. But I feel Force Barrier is a little bit of a safer option, even with Leadership 9, than a Storm Shield even. So, for the most part, you're only going to get hit with 1 Strength 8 or Strength 9 weapon, not counting big templates that would ignore armor completely for Terminators. So, you put that wound on the Librarian and make your Psychic check. You should pass it for the most part. So that just keeps, A, the survivability of the Librarian there, because you can make that better than making a 5+ invuln save, and B, keeps the survivability of your squad, because now you're not pretty much losing a guy to that last cannon. Of course, you could also kill off the Librarian because you fail your leadership check, but I think it's a little bit safer option than utilizing a 3+ save for your Storm Shield even. That's just me personally. The Hellfire is nice if you're going to be aggressive, because that template weapon is always good for softening up a target before you assault. So that's a nice thing there as well. He does have a force weapon, so against Knobs, even against Ogren and Trigons, he can instant kill, one of them in terms of a Ogren squad, or he can instant kill a Trigon should he wound it. So he does have some combat potential. I'm not saying he's useless, because that's not the case at all. I'm just saying he's not going to be used well if you're going to think about using him as a actual Librarian. Even though he is an actual Librarian, if you have the mindset of utilizing him like a captain that happens to have some psychic ability, I think you'll be better off. Because he does not... When I think Librarian, personally, I think utilitarian. And he is not very utilitarian because he only has 2 psychic powers you can choose from. Not even choose from, 2 psychic powers you can use, 1 a turn. So you can't even take him in with the idea of being a defensive or maneuverable type of Librarian like you can in the generic Space Marine Codex or the Blood and Hills Codex or whatever. So that's my thoughts on the Deathwing Librarian. I know people use them, and I know people use them well. I'm just saying in terms of how I play Deathwing and my opinions and thoughts and tactics on Deathwing, I would really think about it if you really want to employ a Deathwing Librarian in your force. Other than that, he's a fantastic model, and I hope eventually we get a proper list of psychic powers for Dark Angels whenever we get our new codex, whenever that will be. But he's not worthless. You just gotta not utilize him like you would a standard Librarian from a generic Space Marine codex. He is more useful being utilized as a captain with some psychic potential. Hopefully that makes sense. I wasn't too boring. And next up will be the Interrogator Chaplain. So until next time, take it easy.